When we're living under these conditions, and this is a special message for everybody, but especially for parents, when we're living under these conditions, which are quite restrictive, our freedom has been restricted, especially in many countries, but most countries now, our freedom has been really restricted. And that can be, hi, Suri Rabinovitz, wonderful, great that you're here. Bring on, share this video, share this as a watch, and we can get as many people on as possible. We've got really important messages here, especially for parents, but for everybody. So it's worthwhile sharing this, if you can, with as many people as you can, so that we can get these important messages out. I was talking to a professor, Tom Tsubo, yesterday, a good friend of mine and colleague, professor in the United States, and he gave me a really important message to pass on to parents particularly. So I'm going to give you that message in a few minutes, but if you could just pass this around, share this video, then we can get that message to as many people as possible, especially living under these considerations. So when we're living under these conditions, things can sometimes get a bit tough. Things can sometimes get a bit distressing. Just from the point of view, first of all, that we are living in the unknown. Hi, Jane. How are you doing? We're living in the unknown. We're living with uncertainty. We're living with physical restrictions. We can't just go out when we want. We're told here in the UK we can only go out once a day. Hi, Louis. How are you doing? Great to have you here. So these are a lot of restrictions on our freedom. Plus, we have the uncertainty of the health situation. We're getting told every few minutes. If you're tuned into media, social media, traditional media, we're getting told every few minutes who's dying and what age they are, where they've been dying, and the numbers for different countries. This is a lot of stimulus to take in for any human being. And we're going to have a reaction to this. So my first piece of advice, and I don't really give advice, that's not my job in the world, but it really is called for at this time, switch off as much as that as possible. If you have in your country kind of an official daily press announcement, then maybe that's worthwhile tuning into. But all the rest, turn the channels off. Try to switch off from the rubbish that we're getting, and I'm getting a lot of rubbish in social media, and try and turn off from the traditional media, because they're going to be churning out to you. Churning and churning and churning every few minutes, the same news, the same news, the same news. And this can be very, very distressing to the human mind. We're not built for that kind of threat information coming in constantly. And the more and more that it comes, then the more we will become distressed, because our mind is on alert just now, right? We're living under a threat situation. We're able to deal with this, okay? Our minds are built to deal with threats. That's not a problem. The problem is that we're not built to deal with it on really a long term. So our mind will eventually get used to the situation, and things will calm down, and we'll adapt to what we've got. But if we're watching the news and it's coming in again fresh, coming in again fresh, coming in again fresh, our mind interprets that we are under constant immediate threat. Now, truth be have it, if you're sitting watching this, look around you and stop for a minute and realize that you are not under immediate threat. You're not going to die in the next couple of minutes. And believe me, if you were going to be dying in the next couple of minutes, this is not where you'll be watching. You're not going to be sitting watching this video if you're going to be dying in a couple of minutes. All right? So it's really important that we realize and have a flexible attention that we are at the moment safe. Now I'll get to details about this in a couple of minutes, but just to say hello to Louis. Louis is saying, how long before there will be civil unrest and public disorder in the UK when people start to ignore and rebel the government? have they enacted this lockdown too early? Well, I can't get into the politics of it. I don't have that information. Most of us do not have that information on the decision makers, whether the timing is right. This is something that is not in our control. And we have to, if we're going to have peace of mind during this period, hi Philippa and Chava also, if we're going to have peace of mind through this period, then we have to disconnect from what is not in our control and connect to what is in our control. Okay? At the moment, it is not in our control unless you're in high government, unless you're prime minister, unless you're privy to the information in order to make a decision. Then we cannot, as people of citizens of the country, know whether this timing is correct or not. Your guess is as good as mine. But what I can tell you from a human behavior point of view, and this is regarding your public disorder, is that human beings, generally speaking, will adapt to new situations. Now, it might be difficult, and we might complain, and we might have distress. But from a psychological perspective, we generally adapt. We're very good at adapting to new situations. Some of us will what we call maladapt. In other words, we will adapt, but not in a healthy way, right? So if we're not adapting healthily, we're going to feel it in our bodies. We're going to get more distressed. We're going to get more anxious. When we're under that situation, we can now do two things. We can respond to that in a useful, healthy way, or we can respond to that in an even more unhealthy way. And that might be violence, and that might be self-harm, and that might be checking out, going to sleep, trying to sleep and get into a depressive state. These, generally speaking, are not useful in the long term and are not healthy for us in the long term. So, regarding losing control and going out and protest and rebel and loot and commit crimes, yes, this is always a potential option. This is an option that governments need to take into consideration, that people will maladapt. In other words, they will react to their internal stresses, frustrations, and distress in an unhealthy way for themselves and for society. And hopefully our government, as well as governments around the world, have procedures in place to deal with that. But what we're trying to deal with here, hi Miri, good morning. What we're trying to deal with here is, how can we personally, as individuals and families that are cooped up in a small environment, how can we adapt in a healthy way and respond in a healthy way to the situation that we find ourselves? And another thing that Professor Tom Tsabo informed me yesterday is that it's going to be very, very natural. It's going to be very expected that if there are more than one person living with you at the moment, and especially between parents and children of all ages, the more that we're in this situation, the more that there are going to be frictions between the people in the households, the more that there are going to be frictions between parents and children of all ages, whether they're really, really young or whether they're teenagers or adolescents. Parents and children under these situations for a long term will, here it comes, will get on each other's nerves. This needs to be expected. Some families quicker and more than others, but eventually it will happen. The more that we're under distress, the more our tolerance is lowered, and the more that our tolerance is lowered, the more we're going to react as Louis has pointed out, from the national level, but I'm talking about from the small family unit, the more we are getting closer to react in a much more aggressive way. Now, generally speaking, we have to understand and expect that this is a natural occurrence, but it doesn't mean we need to let it go down that route. Okay, that's what these sessions are for every day at 11 a.m. UK time. These sessions are here to allow us to be able to respond in a useful, healthy way. And that is why it's important that we get to know how our mind works. That's why it's important that we get to know how our body works under distress, under pressure. Not everybody has a learning experience of working under pressure, of living under pressure. We are privileged to live in the Western world anyway, in a very free, liberal type of society where the amount of pressures are minimum. We have pressures. Sometimes we have economical pressures. Sometimes we have health pressures. Sometimes we have family pressures. Sometimes we have business pressures. There are many different types of pressures in our society on a general basis. What this kind of event, this crisis event, does is it brings all these pressures together at the one time. And that is the dangerous part of all this. And I'm talking about apart from being infected and getting ill. It's all these surrounding pressures coming together in a kind of a boiling pot, a pressure cooker, and what we don't want to happen is for that to explode. And I'm talking about internally as an individual, I'm talking about as a family, and back to what Louis said, we need to have that also regarding society in general. We don't want an explosion due to an emotional response. How do we deal with that? Well, that's exactly what we're dealing with every morning here. And it's really important that we do this on a regular basis. It's not about doing a one-time meditation or a one-time kind of noticing in body scan and you're finished. No. It doesn't work like that. If I was to ask you, if you were a footballer or a juggler, and I was to say, okay, we're going to learn some juggling, and we're going to do keepy up with our feet or headers, with the ball. How many, and I want you to do 50, right? Could you do that tomorrow morning? Well, some of us will have that skill, but most of us will probably not be able to do 50 tomorrow morning. Unless, what would be the way to do it? Anyone on here, put it in the comments. How do you think we could get as many people as possible to do keepy ups with the ball on their feet or with their headers, or be able to juggle a ball for like 50 times? What do we need to do? Any ideas? Put them in the comments. What do you think the ideas are? What is it that we would need to do from a behavioral point of view in order to keep a ball in the air?